Hello and welcome back to our series of interviews from Nowe Horyzonty Festival. Today I'm joined by Luną Carmoon, the director of the movie Horde. Hello.
Hello.
So first off, you created this mixture of disgust, disturbance, but also fun, sincerity, and touchy moments. And it's a really hard thing to pull off, especially for a debut. How did you manage that? Was it something that came naturally, or?
I think I'm naturally a disgusting, disturbing, funny person. So I think naturally the dialogue comes quite easy, but melting them sort of tones together kind of just happened over the course of writing it, really. And also that is kind of just how I view life, tonally, is that life is genreless. 1 minute you can be grieving and the next moment you can be laughing and wetting yourself, and that is just really how I typically see life. Is my emotions are very like that, cold.
So you have this chaotic worldview.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
It really shows in the film, but I also have to ask, how much of you is in this story? Are there elements of autobiographical, or is it all just made up?
No, I'm not Maria, but a lot of the characters are born out of people I know and sort of amalgamations really of people that I've known and grown up with, and it's definitely a love letter to sort of where I'm from and the people that sort of raised me and grew with me, and it's definitely a reflection of the world that I'm from and the area that I'm from, because it is filmed where I'm from, and in that way in dialogue it is. And kind of like how Gary Oldman talks about nil by mouth, is that it's, it's not completely autobiographical, but it is peppered with a lot of truths, and only I know, me and my family know the truths, and yeah, it is of all my essence, like my blood, guts and water, it is me. If I were to be sort of putting in Cronenberg's The Flying Machine, Horde would probably come out if we were to transcript me into a film, so yeah.
Okay, so this kind of relationship with the story, but the hoarding itself as a topic, I think that it was really well shown at in the film. And how much research did you have to do for it, and how did that process even look?
It's quite weird, because growing up in the UK since I was a child, every day there are hoarding programs on, Buried Alive, and they're really exploitative and really damaging, I think, to people who are going through this obsessive compulsive behaviour to collect. And I never thought they really were infused with the empathy that it deserved. And I think hoarding is a very particular kind of disorder, if we call it that, in the way that it is one of the only physical manifestations of what's happening inside of our heads. And it's people trying to compartmentalise their past and their pain with physical objects. And one of the things that stuck with me throughout researching was this one forum, and this woman describes that, the antithesis of hoarding is that people can hurt you but things can't, and that there is sanctum in collections. And it's also a very animal, carnal kind of thing to just nest and collect. Most animals behave and do this, so why is it wrong when we do it? But obviously when you implement a child into that environment, there begs the question of safety and responsibilities. But if a singular person is doing, I wonder how bad it really is if it helps that person move throughout the world in a less painful way. That's not for me to say, but that was kind of the approach I had to making Horde, is that there's absolutely no judgment, that people have to do what they have to do to survive, and sometimes that can be things that feel like oddities to others, but safety and sanctums to them.
It's a really interesting point of view on that problem, because like you said, we are usually facing this version of hoarders that are just presented as crazy people and not as hurting people, really. I will basically repeat my question from yesterday's Q&A, the Teen Drum.
Yes.
Why did you decide to use the Teen Drum, the film, and also mention the book? in the film, because I get that there's like this this comparison of how the teen drum is, how a boy gets through the trauma of living in a world that's very brutal and he doesn't understand it, the same way as our character is trying to live through the trauma of things she repressed and cannot comprehend. But what's the story behind choosing especially this story for this reason?
I think it happened the way it was meant to happen, and it was quite strange how Tin Drum came to find me again, and that my nan used to lock me in on hot summer days, shut the curtains and make me watch all these kind of disturbing VHS tapes that she had taped the night before that were on late, of just American TV movies, all kinds of art house, strange films that, you know, I later today am discovering. But really, like, I feel like my work is just me trying to chase them white wows. That I'm really just trying to capture the essences of these moments of hiding behind the sofa with my hands behind my eyes, that feeling of disgust and awe, that car crash feeling of like I can't look but I have to, because it's rupturing something inside my belly, like bugs in stomachs, and that I have to know what it is, and I'm sort of chasing them. And strangely, when I was first concocting Hauled and began writing the story, I watched Tin Drum, and I realised and remembered that I'd seen that film before with my nan, hiding behind the sofa. Shouldn't be watching it, but just like young Maria when she's watching that scene where they're sort of lapping up the sweets and the dust, that I just couldn't look away. And there is something of kindred to Tin Drum and Hauled in the way that it's quite a sensory experience. There are a lot of disgusting sensory things that happen with animals and creatures and all kinds of things. And in Tin Drum, like the eel scene, like I'll never forget that, them collecting eels in the sea with a horse head, and things that just sort of burn into your brain at a young age and never leave you and kind of haunt you, but also entice you to want to find more things like it. And you know, just like Oscar in Tin Drum, Maria is, you know, we're looking at everything through a childhood lens, through a lens of a child, and you don't realise how disturbing and how off-kilter some things are in your life until, you know, you're 30 or 40 or even older, and they kind of hit you like a double-decker bus and you realise what was wrong or right or strange. And I think they'd be a good double bill, Hauled and Tin Drum.
Yeah, you also like practically recreated the scene from the film,
Yeah.
like the drumming, and I feel like that scene is obviously like taken from that movie, but also I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that you also take a lot from Żuławski and possibly from Lynn Ramsey, but I'm not that sure about that. Like, could you tell us more about your inspirations for that movie?
Yeah, I mean, Lynn Ramsey is a queen. She is my favourite female British director. She is special and textured, and I love Morven Keller and Ratcatcher. They're my favourites of hers. Again, and they have this sort of numinous quality that run underneath them. But Żuławski, yeah, I've heard he's a bit of hit or miss here. People hate him or love him, and
Yes.
but we can all definitely recognise, whether we hate him or love him, that no one quite captures hysteria like him. Like the swarm, he captures like the swarm of insects in humans, in bodies and in sounds and vocals and language that no other director does. That he can make you feel hysteria, you know, from 0 to 100. And there's definitely a lot of influence of him in this, in terms of even the way Michael and Maria speak to each other. Their sort of language is very much, you can see that between Sam and Isabella in Possession, the way they talk to each other, and especially the iron scene is definitely of that. But more importantly, of my days are more beautiful than my nights. That's my favourite Żuławski, and there's definitely even shots that we visually were influenced by that film in particular, and the language in which he just created that is so of riddle and rhymes and the theatre of the absurd. But also I love Polish cinema. Like it's strange that I'm here, because 3 of my biggest influences really of Hauled are Polish directors: Żuławski, and Jerzy Skolimowski, like I love him. I love The Deep End is one of my favourite films, and you can definitely feel like the macabre humour and the deadpan quality of his work in Hold.
Yeah.
I feel like I saw a really fantastic. He did a season at the BFI, and I went to all of the Q&As and watched a lot of his films. I think he's wonderful, and of course Kieslowski, like he's a massive influence for Hold in terms of like the numinous and the divinity, that there is an undercurrent of something quite unearthly that pumps under Hold. And my three, I call them the others, the Tindra Man, Stillbirth Lady and Golcoin Woman, they're all dressed like people in the Decalogue. And they're all in these sort of...
You're right, I didn't notice that.
And they're all in these liminal spaces in which, there's these moments where the characters in the Decalogue are all of a sudden in like a shopping centre with no one there, or in the middle of a street in places that should be hustling and bustling but are just completely empty. It's like these people could be alive or dead, like they could be ghosts. And he's a big influence of that sort of numinous quality that runs underneath all of his work. And I love his work. I love The Double Life of Veronique. I think it's a beautiful film, and yeah.
Wow, that's really great. And like you already said about these two main characters, the chemistry between them is probably like one of the most intriguing elements of the film.
Yeah.
So if you could tell us a little bit about how did that happen? Like, is that something that just naturally happened between them, or were you trying to get it out of them? Like, how was that process?
Yeah, it's really funny. I just knew from casting them two that usually when you have a chemistry test, you see multiple different people. But from just meeting them two separately, the only chemistry test I did was with them two, because I knew that they were just going to be like magnets. And there's a facial similarity sort of aspect to them that I knew that was just going to make them feel like they'd known each other as well. And it wasn't hard to get that out of them, because we were all like a family really, and everyone felt super safe and felt like it was as much as theirs as it was mine as a film. So it was just playing. They were like children. I mean, everyone on set was like children, that it really was. We all knew how special the project was, and that we wanted to give it that love, and it was just full collaboration and just was amazing. And we had an amazing intimacy coordinator, Louise Kempton, who helped us make sure everyone just, felt really in touch with their bodies, that they could go to them spaces and they could be animal and ugly and all of these things that attract us to one another. And, most of them scenes as well were closed sets. And so it was really just them two and Nanu, who shot my film, Nanu Segal, who were just playing. And so it was easy to get that animal out of them because they wanted to. It was like theatre to them. Yeah.
That's really great to hear that like they just clicked, right? Because I think that's where most of the movie magic happens, right? Like you can plan everything out and like hope for the best, but it just has to like magically do it at some point, right? And also during yesterday's Q&A, you said something that really stuck with me. You said that the thing about making your first movie is that it very well may be your last movie, so you shouldn't be holding back. And how did that approach, how did that thinking influence the production of this film?
Yeah, I just think when you don't have anything to fall back on, you're hungry enough to take the risks. Sometimes you risk it for the biscuit, that you just truly do. I wanted to know that if I died after making this film, that it was of everything of me, that it was my blood and my guts and my bones, that like what you're seeing inside of me, you're seeing inside of my head, and that I would rather people be disgusted and embarrassed to watch it, and that even my parents and everyone seeing it, that it was worth all of that, because it is truly of me, and it is honest, it is laid bare for people to see what kind of person I am. And it's always that thing, like growing up, like I used to dress like quite out there, alternative as a teenager, and like the one day I would decide to not dress like myself, to blend in, someone would walk across the street who was dressed like me, and we would have had this kindred moment of connection. And it didn't happen because I wasn't dressed like myself, because I was trying to appease other people and be hidden. And that was a connection I missed, and that's how I've kind of lived my life in terms of even making films, is that, you know, why would I dilute it? Why would I not go to them places that I want to see in other people's work? Because then people who may connect to my stuff and feel less alone in it will not if I don't do that. So I think it's worth taking that risk, and I also don't really care what people think enough to not do that anymore. As you get older, you just feel more and more like that. So, yeah, I'm just making stuff for my 14-year-old self, really, that I would want to find on the deep web.
That's probably the best approach you can have to making movies.
Mm-hmm.
But you debuted at Venice and was met with like positive feedback. And from what I can tell from like all the discussions after screenings of your film here in Wrocław, people are loving it. So it's probably not your last film. Let's hope for it. And do you have any plans, ideas for the next one?
Yeah, it's quite a bloodthirsty tale, and it's a lot of brutal meetings of the past. It's quite violent in a way that is honest. I promised myself that my first feature would not have any blood, because my shorts have blood. So now I can really go overboard with the blood, and I can promise that there will be loads of blood.
There will be blood.
Oh, there will be blood, yeah. There will be tanks and tanks and tanks of blood, and glamour, I hope. A bit of glamour.
Okay, so something like The Substance?
Not quite.
Not quite.
Bit more brutal in emotion, I feel like it.
Okay.
It might be. I've not seen that film, but from the trailer I've seen, it looks very glamorous, and I love Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley, so I'm excited to see that. But this is going to be very British still, and very heartfelt, I hope, as well, as much as Horde.
Okay, so the last question is about the ending of the film. Mm-hmm. How do you read that ending? I mean, what were you, when you were writing it, were you more like it's an optimistic ending or pessimistic? Because I feel like it's kind of open to interpretation, depending on who you are as a person. You can see it as a moment of finally finding freedom, moment of finishing with your grief, or maybe losing yourself in that grief. So what were you planning for that ending?
From the beginning, I never wanted to tell a story about someone who completely transforms during their grief, because I think grief is never ending, and that it continuously will play hide and seek with you. So you'll notice that there's not actually a lot of change to her characterization, that she is as rude in the beginning as she is in the end, that there are moments perhaps where she gets more grotesque and loud and rude as she's in this sort of grandiose illusion, but she doesn't have a transformation. There is no, I'm perfectly fine after this, I've worked through everything in a couple of months and I'm healed. There isn't that, because that's not life, and that's not a reality that I believe in. And so you can't expect someone to get over something like that and a behavioural pattern like that in a couple of months. It could go on for years and it could go on forever. It completely depends on that person. But for me, I like to believe that there's a bit more of a feverish ending to the film. But I also believe that it depends where you are exactly in your life and your mood of how you interpret it, you know, that she could possibly just really be getting over it and surrendering to the reality of her situation and celebrating it. And there's also a reality of, like, she could come home after that and that she's just experiencing it there, or she could stay in that landfill for the rest of her life, under that rubbish, just like, you know, have you ever read Perfume by Patrick Suskind? And the man lives in the cave for years and just imagines this whole other reality just spinning around him until he realises he's been, you know, in a default mode network for years of his life. And I like to think that the thing that she has inside of her is birthed in under that landfill, and she lives out the rest of her days creating that same cycle, because as much as we think we can break cycles, we often find ourselves repeating them cycles, and she lives under that pile of other people's catalogues of love with her catalogue, her new catalogue of love, and it just starts again. So I don't know, it's very much where you are, and it changes for me as much as I'm sure the different people watching it, but yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you all for watching. See you in the next one.